So my name is Rolf Parker-Houghton, and I'm delighted to be here. I find myself actually temporarily flummoxed as to what to say about myself. So I have been writing poetry for many years, but it wasn't until COVID came and I was struggling, like all of us, that I began to write on a schedule, as opposed to just writing when I felt like it or felt the mood struck me. And then the thing that came after that was submitting on a schedule. And then the thing that came after that, which I learned from a poet who was published in one of the same journals that I was to be prepared to submit your poem to the next publication, so that as soon as you got the rejection, it went out the next day, so that you took the rejection and turned it into a hope again. And so I was delighted amidst all this. So here I am, I'm waking up at early in the morning, and instead of feeling angst, it's like, oh, I can lie in bed and experience angst over many of the things which are worthy of angst, or I could write a poem. I guess I'll get up and write a poem, and or I could submit a bunch of poems. And I was lucky enough that I had the first type of cycle for the first large batch of poems that I sent out, which was acceptance, versus like the other thing came later. But it was nice to have the first thing to start me off. So I started getting a lot of poems accepted, and for me, a lot. And then I submitted to the Bheal 5 Words International Contest, and I got shortlisted. And I'm like, whoa, fantastic. And we actually said yes to going to Ireland before we had our passports. So then we ended up having to beg Bernie for help getting our passports, so we barely got there. It was just everything, but it was just all about saying yes, yes, yes. And it just kept going. So I don't know, I could waste more time in this when you could be hearing poetry talking about myself, but maybe as one way of introducing myself, I'll actually read the poem that came out of that, which will explain. I'll read the poem that actually got me to Ireland. So, let's see here. I've obeyed everyone's desire for less light, making a blasting halo behind me at a sacrifice of not having almost enough light to read. So, here we go. This is doable. This is the University of Brattleboro and the Uncluttered Table. You aren't going to believe me unless you look this up. But I, Dr. Balderdash, created a fake university and a fake paranormal paleontology department with my very real wife, Cynthia, who created a miniature Yeti, so of course we call it Tiny Foot. Out of a G.I. Joe doll she covered in fur and added a new face to, sculpted from modeling clay, and we took his photo running in a touch-me-not forest, and we laughed and made a baby and loaned Tinyfoot to our local librarian, Francisco Alejandro, who made a video of him swinging in a tree. Now you can move to Vermont, check out Tinyfoot from the library, and make your own fake photo. And we bought a house and cast plaster chicken Rex bones in a dinosaur bone-shaped holes we dug with David and Jude in our backyard and buried the bones downtown. Flew fake UFOs to the top of the parking garage, black helium balloons, a fishing pole, LED lights, plus people willing to believe equals UFO. And we got a pig skull from a pig roast at my friend's birthday party and popped some goggles on him. A pig skull, goggles, plus people who need to laugh equals UFO alien. And buried him deep under a tombstone on which we chiseled in the words, "In memory of the mysterious Brattleboro airman." And we buried his stone, and we dug up his stone, and his skull, and his ribs, and the chicken wrecks in front of people who bid in an auction for the remains. And our son, who loves life and math, collected their money, and they cheered because we were faking a UFO alien crash site just for them. And I invited them to march around the tombstone of Levi Fuller, a scientist who tried to establish the note A at 435 beats per minute, and who is also our long-dead governor of Vermont, a state that is living with fentanyl and floods from the warm oceans. And the people marched, blowing notes on bottles and clacking wooden clackers tuned the way he liked it, 435 beats per minute. And Susan Keese from VPR came and left with a story. And Chris Mays from The Reformer came and interviewed Dr. Riofo, a.k.a. Cynthia, my wife, and left with a story. And we made love on the table, and much, much later, invited everyone in town to our house to carve burning pumpkins. And we took them to gently dip in the river and set them, the jack-o'-lanterns, and the mighty Quinticu, and the pumpkins floated downstream to the cheers of people. We have video who sent them to the sea every Halloween with us for the last 20 years. And we set a little model of Cynthia's Holstein Brontosaurus hybrid in front of the Holstein Association building, and took the gentle beast photo from the right angle so that it seemed to be a giant in the street blocking traffic. Next to the museum where my wife's paper spaceships were displayed, back when I was just a math teacher boyfriend who didn't do his share of the dishes. And embarrassingly admitted to this Carhartt-wearing carpenter, this wilderness canoe hike leader, this bronze caster, this sculptor, this arty Artemis, that sometimes I liked women dressed in poof sleeve dresses from the 1800s as works of art because I thought it made women look ripe as mangoes. And she laughed and said, never. And then before marrying me forever, despite our mismatch in many things. Would you believe that the joy I have sought to bring to this wonderful town is due in part to my tumbles into a hidden pit and my desire to pull others out? Would you believe that after we were married, we were both sometimes harmed by the sudden, steady certainty of disappointment in each other, and years of fermenting frustration? It happens. And what if I told you our arguments, our differences were worse than fights? Not mean, never hands, only words of blind despair, but so hopeless at times, it felt like the only way we stayed together was by taking divorce off the table. And that can work sometimes. And it worked. Like magic for us. And that is the University of Brattleboro. So, as I said in the poem, if you look that up, we actually did do all of that stuff. That's all real. Like there are newspaper stories, there's television, video. So it's of course it's a long excuse to get to the last stanza, if you will. It's because of anything, the second stanza is maybe really the meat of the poem in its own way. So at any rate, that is that. I don't know what, actually I should have checked maybe with your format. Do we go back and forth with questions, or just keep performing and then we save questions for later? Right? Okay, that's fine. That's fine. So when I MC the third Thursday open mic, as I say, part of the way we do it is we require before you get to do your own poem, you have to read a poem by someone else that you love. And I kind of did that by having Tom read, but I like to intersperse in my performances other poets. So I'm next going to switch, and I'm going to do two versions of the same poem. It's a short poem by Carl Sandburg. So there are two completely different ways to read this poem, it seems to me, or maybe more. But this is Phazog. I'm going to give it the first reading, which is the thing. I think this is what Sandburg was actually shooting for. But it takes something out of your throat to do it. So, Phazog by Carl Sandburg. This face you got, this here phazog you carry around, you never picked it out for yourself. It all, did you? This here phazog, someone handed it to you. Am I right? Somebody said, here's yours, now go see what you can do with it. Somebody slipped it to you, and it was like a package marked, no goods exchanged after being taken away. This face you got. So I stumbled on this poem shortly after I broke my nose in 6th grade, and it actually seemed like an appropriate time to find it because my nose was not doing what it was supposed to do, which was just sit calmly in the front of my face. And so my reading went towards that, and Carl Sandburg also has all of these other poems that are capturing the American voice, and some of them are really rough voices. So, but I found a completely different way to read this poem, which I think is also legitimate. Phazog. This face you got. This here phazog you carry around. You never picked it out for yourself. At all. Did you? This here phazog, somebody handed it to you. Am I right? And somebody said, here's yours. Now go see what you can do with it. Somebody slipped it to you, and it was like a package marked, no goods exchanged after being taken away. This face you got. So that is Mr. Sandburg. And I'm going to read some of my own formal poems now. I'm a lover of both formal and informal. In that reading from Tom, you heard me forcing Tom to do repeated lines. Terzinels are a form invented by Louis Churko, but basically you take the midline of the first stanza and you plunk it down as the third line. They're all triplets of the next stanza. So it just creates this cascading waterfall. So I'm going to do I'm going to do this one first. This is Saving a Ramirez Guitar. Lift the lid. Release the mold and let it float in the air. Count to 30. Lift. Hold. Sand scrape and lightly tear this soundboard of spruce dust and let it float in the air. Polish the frets of green rust, corroded by now dead fingers that once drummed this soundboard of spruce dust. Remove the brittle strings, strung, snapped, plucked, picked, damped, corroded by now dead fingers that once drummed. Wipe clean the brittle blue label stamped Conception to Geronimia below the strings, snapped, plucked, picked, damped. In this barn of abandoned things, lift the lid, release the mold, Conception to Geronomia below the strings. Count to 30. Lift. Hold. Oh, sorry, I should have been more prepared. This one, I'm grateful enough. This is just in the new edition of the Lyric, which is, I didn't know was published out of Jericho right here in Vermont, which you guys probably were aware of. So this is called Vermont, the first winter after graduation. And it's another Terzinel. After the 40th death of evening gray, you know that winter finally has you. You read dead authors and wait for May. Dark inviting water freezes white-capped blue, while when a goose's webbed feet fuse with ice, you know that winter finally has you. Nothing to do but cook some rice. No point in letting the coyotes eat well. When a goose's webbed feet fuse with ice. Her wings fluttered when your axe fell. You accept the goose and her bad luck. No point in letting the coyotes eat well. In the dark, you gut her and pluck. Feathers become fistfuls of flowers for her wake. You accept the goose and her bad luck. Do you savor winter's blood-dark ache after the 40th death of evening gray? Feathers become fistfuls of flowers for her wake. You read dead authors and wait for May. But we're almost there. Like, we're almost done with the winter thing. So, let's see. My apologies. Let's see. I'll do Hope. Hope. On his way to Bethlehem, which is in the West Bank, King Sigurd offered Saracens of Colaris the sacrament on the tip of a spear. If they took the sacred into their mouths, they lived. Otherwise, they took the iron point through the throat. For Sigurd was still very much a Viking, and while also a Christian of some sort, he didn't really love his enemies so much as he loved killing them. And he's famous for winning every battle and for bringing back from Jerusalem a splinter of the true cross to Trondheim. But this is how we stumble forward. First, all the Viking converts had to be baptized, and granted, a mere dunk in the water doesn't make a man less murderous. But hang on, they also had to give up sacrificing people to Odin with an axe. And yes, Sigurd still went on Viking raids, famously plundering parts of Portugal. But with time, raids and bludgeoning brains out of skulls was no longer acceptable behavior for the warriors of a Norwegian king. Give it a few centuries and a few centuries more, and the Christian socialists of Norway were successfully demanding compassionate care for all. Sigurd didn't really know what he had started, and we can't know how much kinder we may become. I am going to waste mere moments. Aha! It was truly mere moments. I almost thought I was stalling for time, but in reality, I've got it right here. This This is relatively new. And it was published along with a bunch of other writers in down here in Windham County, a lot of them from Right Action. Our local newspaper never publishes poems. I would never normally consider publishing a poem in a newspaper, but they had a call for reaction to current news. And so an exception was made on both sides, and this is what came out of that. This is called Ursula K. Le Guin at the Border. Ursula, who died 5 years ago, told me in an essay that fantasy literature allows people to read stories of outrageous behavior without triggering the identities of nations people feel partisan about, so that compassion can sweep the reader into the caressing currents before they have a chance to resist the final powerful tug of that great ocean, and their prejudice has a chance of getting washed off into the relief of grief. Outrageous behavior by Martians against the people of Pluto, and by the people of Pluto against the people of Mars, can be recognized by everyone as unacceptable, indefensible, unjust, and most importantly, avoidable. Bombs aren't just for maiming and killing people. They have other important purposes, and bombs usually aren't just dropped anymore, relying on some hotshot young ace pilot with excellent vision, a steady hand, and a good aim. No, that's so December 1941. Bombs are guided usually by lasers now, and the reporter writing in 2022 pointed out in 2022, it was no accident that they'd landed in Anthedon Harbor in Gaza, exactly where the archaeologists have been working on a World Heritage Site, a place where ancient Greek and Egyptian, then Philistine, then Byzantine, and then Arab sailors all displaced each other and docked their boats for 3,000 years and left their homes and their engraved stones and even their bones, now all blown to bits by a bomb and then another bomb, craters replacing the carefully measured transect lines of the archaeologists. The news featured Palestinians outraged over what was done, and more importantly, who had done it. On the West Bank in 2021, an ancient wall that was protecting the oldest Israelite unhewn altar stones was ripped out of the earth of Mount Ebal by a Palestinian road crew. The news featured Israelis outraged over what was done, and more importantly, who had done it. Ursula, I know I fucked it up by not setting today's news on Mars and just stealing it from the newspapers in some attempt to frame parallel stories that will be brushed aside by some readers as some attempt to create false equivalencies. And these last lines are just a placeholder for the ones that will allow some reader to cradle another person's pain like a crying newborn they tenderly welcome into their lives. I'm not going to read the entirety of this poem because I'm just going to read an excerpt from it. And this is a poem by Lita Martins. I have written Lita Martins many times telling her how much I love her poetry. She's not written back, and that's okay. The thing about this poem is I disagree with everything that I understand. But the thing is, and I don't write poetry like this, but it's a great poem. It's not the content or the meaning. It's sometimes it is the content and the meaning, right? Like it's happiest when everything comes together in a great crescendo. Fine. For me, I disagree with her. I write history, so you'll hear lines where you might be able to figure out why I disagree with her. But I don't care. I've loved this poem since forever, and that's enough. Here's Lita Martins' Solstice. Not always were the suburbs of the night so vast, and the movements of the eyes so tenuous. Not always were the signs of pain so blurred, nor the footfalls so faint. The hollowness of the word enacts the duration of memory, imaginary texture of a strange and familiar desire. In the suburbs of the night, my illusions dwell, and on the fringes of the real, a drunken voice hallucinates, slaughtering the intrusion of time. History is nothing but fabulation. Memory is always an invasion of the void. And I will leave the rest to copyright. But that's Lita Martin's Solstice. Another quick poem by somebody else, and then I'll get back to me, is Lobster. Some of you may be familiar with Anne Sexton's American Bestiary. This is straight out of that. And for myself, all my favorite poems of her come out of this collection. And this is Lobster. A shoe with legs. A stone dropped from heaven. He does his mournful work alone. He is the prospector for gold, with secret dreams of godheads and fish heads. Until suddenly a cradle fastens around him, and he is trapped as the USA sleeps. Somewhere far off, a woman lights a cigarette. Somewhere far off, a car goes over a bridge. Somewhere far off, a bank is held up. This is the world the lobster knows not of. He is the old hunting dog of the sea, who in the morning will rise from it and be undrowned, and they will take his perfect green body and paint it red. So, thank you, Mary Oliver. That's what I would say. Okay, I'm going to go back to my chapbook. We've already done that one. I'll go in order now, which will save us all a lot of time. I'm a vegetarian. Nonetheless, when I went to writing group and there was salmon on the spread, I just couldn't help myself. That was that. It's one of the few times I've broken down. I can say that in the last 20 years, but this is undrowned and sitting on my friend's table. It's yet another Terzanel where you hear the repeating line keep coming back. This salmon in front of me swam long, cold miles in some unknown sea. Was he netted near the Aleutian Isles? Did he hatch in a Russian stream, swim long, cold miles, feasting on caddisflies and baby bream? Many months after his mother dropped her eggs, did he hatch in a Russian stream? Did he dart between a brown bear's legs and tumble down the falls? Many months after his mother dropped her eggs, probably he was farmed in plastic sheet walls and never had to risk death. No tumble down the falls. Pulled out, unwilling, like a man's last breath from some unknown sea. He never had to risk death. This salmon in front of me. And another Terzanel. This is a mile into the birches, or at least a mile into the birches. This place does not curse nor pardon. This is not your home. This is your secret garden. Trees and friends fall to loam, and only some drop down with grace. This is not your home. Nothing below but leaves and a trace, left by a father who dropped his seeds. Only some drop down with grace. Birches are bones, cold, lovely weeds, not tended, not planted, left by a father who dropped his seeds. You stand a tree bent and slanted under winds and weights of snow, not tended, not planted, no matter what you did or know. This place does not curse nor pardon. Under winds and weights of snow, This is your secret garden. All right. So some of these poems, as I put into the back, and I made it a contest for people to figure out which poems were from an earlier portion of my writing period and others. And I'll just say from here on out, we're jumping in decades. I mean, we already were, but so you can just take your guesses, and I leave it at that. This is In the Orchard After Harvest. Help me with my mittens, you said with a chuckle. I need my fingers for this, not just my hands. Lying entwined on a pile of apple leaves with you, on the hill in full moonlight, a fragile hint of violet on the snow, then blues, hues of an ever-present sun, shadows on bare trees at midnight. Delicate moonlight failed to warm our cold fingers and noses, but each of us was happy to slide under the stars like children in winter. Night lover, on me, tasting, drunk, in love, each time I sank, the warmth of you rose to greet me with a laugh. I learned how easily the cold air affected you, how your small body shivered even after I kissed you. What I didn't know, as yet couldn't know, was how very sensitive you also were to fear and to endings and to devotion. And because you don't have the slightest chance, I'll confess this is like the lowest form of formal poetry, held in complete disdain by most formal poets. It's an acrostic, which has been left to kindergarten teachers, but I'm trying to steal it back because Ben Jonson actually had acrostics. And as I say, since you can't possibly read this, I'll tell you what it says is, hi, love does not die. It is wasted. So that's that. This is not my favorite Sistina, but it's one that's published. So I like it. I'm not saying I dislike it. It's just not my favorite. So it's but it's got the envoy on top. So I broke the form a little bit. Anyways, the ghosts. The Puritans of this country hated the accused. They used pillories. Sorry, I'm going to start again. The ghosts. The Puritans of this country hated the accused. They used pillory. Damn. So I'm going to just tell you what's going on here. I know you can't catch COVID over the computer anyways, but I don't have COVID. What I've got is asthma, and I was doing woodworking, and I managed to get dust into my lungs. And so, I'm going to try this one more time. The Puritans of this country, the ghosts. The Puritans of this country hated the accused. They used pillories and a lot of powder and shot, and year after year, public shame was America's news. I have not read or listened to the news since April of this year. The people who were shot, the storm that flooded that country, the actor who was accused, I know nothing about them. I know nothing about them, but all about the news. The innocent and guilty will both be accused, and every single year, chaos will swamp someone's country, and people will be lined up and shot. The first person ever shot, I know a little about them. They were in Hubei, a country from history, not the news. 1132 was the year. The shooter was never accused. I know I might be accused of not caring about those who were shot, but the people torn open each year demand that I care for them all. Enjoying ghosts from eons of news, from every time and country. Is it possible to change a country? To save the falsely accused? That's the value of the news. Not just to tally up the shot, but to prod us to help them year after year after year. I'm my 55th year, and I don't understand my country. Its delight in us versus them, and in accusing the accused, or reading how many times they were shot. Information is needed, but to hell with the news. I say that as a newspaper reporter and the son of a newspaper editor of 40 years. It's just what it is. So now on to something completely different. This is what you are. Caterpillar, yes, a dressed up worm, a whipper with colorful chompers ingesting our leaves. Again and again, resting, ingesting again. The only thing you grow is bigger. Caterpillar, maggot, worm. Spanish has but one word for you, gusano. Do you even know what a plant is? Or do you simply detect food and take nasty little bites, letting your hungry sense of odor determine what happens next? Tear open a new leaf, or move into a new source of chemicals, of nutrients for your swelling rotund body. Yes, you withering, elegant elephant worm. You marching xylophone army worm. You petty terror. You egregious, self-important, entomological error. This is yet another acrostic, and it says, critics do not create. And so it happened after I read a critic who had the notebooks of a poet and had the audacity to say that because the poet was going back and forth, changing meaning in rhyme, that poet was a slave to rhyme and not a mature poet. And they completely did not understand that as we write, we change our meaning sometimes, not because we're a slave to rhyme, but because we're learning what we think in the process of writing. And so that's kind of like a poetic rant against a particular critic. This is another rant. And I will never write anything so snide again as this, but this had to happen. This is called After Leviticus and Before Deuteronomy. This town has 12 bars and one paperback bookstore. Doesn't that strike you as odd? Does each student take a number and wait till it's his or her turn to browse a book? Is that why the newsroom is never full? A German-like orderliness preventing stampedes at the bookstore? Reading the scorecard in the big concrete stadium we all know and love is not the same thing as reading Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. The man with the iguana who used to work at the coffee shop, one of two of them, count 'em, said it best. This town ruins everything. Does that man with the iguana, the one who later worked at the Mexican restaurant with a good beer, that place that failed in about 1 year, does he still live in this state? Or did he vanish like those other two bookstores that used to struggle here, but withered and died like the fig tree that offended Jesus, like a brain-damaged man in a coma whose feeding tube has been removed? Going once, bye-bye. Going twice, lights out. Going bankrupt, closing sale, books half-priced, but no one is buying. They're at the bar again and again and again, stepping over the vomit of Christian freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors that form puddle lakes of half-digested firewater on the sidewalk. The barman caused the great deluge to come out of a garden hose, purifying the land with a flood of tap water. But after 40 minutes and 40 minutes more, The streets still smell like Lazarus did on the third day. Can you tell I've been here too long? We were not meant for each other. Buy me a book if you can find one. Call me a snob and send me the fuck home. So, that's that. Thank you. My apologies. This is with apologies to Shakespeare. It's how the hell should I know what her eyes look like? Her name is Betty, or Similia, or some such. And her breasts are no smaller than grapefruit, or perhaps a lot smaller than the palm of her hand, and set perfectly high as though at attention at all times, or perhaps they're just the breasts that nourish my baby, our child, finally a child. And Betty's lips form this perfect circle, small, puffy lips, just right for her, but perhaps they're just the lips that say, there you are, I was looking for you. And in so doing, draw me to her bed for the next 40 years. And she wears the most revealing clothes, each footstep causing some portion of her body to bounce or swish into startling view. And she delights in herself and in the effect she has, and she's sexual Java in my cup of life. Or maybe she is practically a nun until recently, and her clothes smell of cleaned cotton and nothing of her is seen save her hands, her upper neck, and her face. It is her safety suit for dealing with a probing world. Her no thank you please uniform that she pulls on to protect her from daylight. And each night she asks me to pull it off of her, and she throws it on the floor like a boa constrictor that we repeatedly vanquish. And we laugh at the snake that almost got her again. With me, she reveals and revealing all. And she will know that there are many ways to be lovable. But Betty or Similia, or whatever the hell her name turns out to be after I meet her, will definitely know what the hell love is and what it is not. That much is clear. How lucky to be old enough, finally old enough, to find it easy to love many, but to only need one. So I met her eventually. And yes, there was a baby. So this is You Make Me Love Robots. You make me love robots. There is joy in the very moment of your conception. Not that I conceived of you. I mean, I had no idea you would love cheetahs above all other animals, nor that you would ask to wrestle with me every day while you wore the cheetah costume that your mother made you back in October. Right now, you're tearing apart my air with noise, shrill joy over a robot, a toy, a December present, an invader from a land I once chose to sneer at, the electronic, the robotic, the childish machine-obsessed world that Loki or Shiva, maybe, utterly long to undo, upend, and unmake. Child, I transverse this ocean, landing at tiny, far-flung islands of joy. You are not a cheetah. You are a volcano, spewing plumes of shrieking ash and lava, thrusting forth land I never expected to find. This is December in New England. Ice-covered trees die under their weight if they aren't released by early spring. December lies to them. Light's coming back to the world, boys, he says. Only hang on a little longer, and there'll be velvety green life pushing out of every woody pore. But yesterday I saw a maple split. Open, good wood and bad, splinters and sap. Until then, I thought perhaps he was sincere. I tried to knock him down and set him on fire, but December just winked at me and turned to the trees and said, "Ha! Only a little longer, boys. Just a little bit longer now. I think we're all going to make it." Then laughs. He knows no one makes it. Winter never dies. It just comes around again to see who's left and who has arrived, newly for removal, for murder, and for his sympathy in the dark with you. And again, this is yet another acrostic. And it says, "I did love you. I don't want you." So, previous part of the arc, if you will. I am not sure how much time is left. And I actually don't see a time setting on my screen. Ha! If you say that, we'll be here till 3 a.m. next week. Okay. All right. I'm going to do another poem by somebody else. I don't know how many of you out there know Don Marquis, but the wonderful thing about him is way before Ezra Pound, he had this story that a cockroach was writing all these poems on his desk by jumping from key to key. So there's no punctuation, and the line breaks are, maybe you could say, random, maybe worse than that. So it takes a while to master the lines. But this is my favorite Don Marquis. This is The Robin and the Worm. A robin said to an angleworm as he ate him, "I'm sorry, but a bird has to live somehow." The worm, being slow-witted, could not gather his descent into a wisecrack and retort, and he was effectually swallowed before he could turn a phrase. By the time he had reflected long enough to say, "But why must a bird live?" he felt the beginnings of a gradual change invading him. Some new and disintegrating influence was stealing along from his positive to his negative pole, and he did not have the mental stamina of a Jonah to resist the insidious process of assimilation, which comes like a thief in the night. "Demons and fish hooks," he exclaimed. "I'm losing my personal identity as a worm. My individuality is melting away from me. Odds craw, I'm becoming part and parcel of this bloody robin. So help me, I'm thinking like a robin, and not like a worm any longer. Yes, I even find myself agreeing that a robin must live. I still do not understand with my mentality why a robin must live. And yet I swoon into a condition of belief. Yes, by heck, that is my dogma, and I shout it, a robin must live." "Amen," said a beetle, who preceded him into the interior. "That is the way I feel myself. Is it not wonderful when one arrives at the place where he can give up his ambitions and resignedly, nay, even with gladness, recognize that it is a far, far better thing to be merged harmoniously in the cosmic all, and this comfortable situation in his midst so affected the marauding robin that he perched upon a blooming twig and sang until the blossoms shook with ecstasy. He sang, 'I have a good digestion, and there is a God after all, which I was wicked enough to doubt yesterday when it rained. Breakfast, breakfast! I am full of breakfast, and they are at breakfast in heaven. They breakfast in heaven, and all is well with the world.'" So intent was this pious and murderous robin on on his own sweet song that he did not notice Mehitable the cat sneaking toward him. She pounced just as he has extended his larynx into a melodious burst of thanksgiving, and he went the way of all flesh, fish, and good red herring. Ah, purred Mehitable, licking the last feather from her whiskers. Was that not a beautiful song he was singing just before I took him to my bosom? They breakfast in heaven. All is well with the world. How true that is. Ah. And even yet his song echoes in the haunted woodland of my midriff. Peace and joy in the world, and over all the provident skies. How beautiful is the universe when something digestible meets with a good digestion. How sweet the embrace when Adam rushes to the arms of waiting Adam, and they dance together, skimming the fairy feet along a tide of gastric juices. Oh, feline cosmos, you were made for cats, and in the spring, old cosmic thing, I dine and dance with you. I shall creep through the yonder tall grasses to see, if peradventure, some silly fledgling thrushes, newly from the nest, be not floundering therein. I have a gusto this morning, I have a hunger, I have a yearning to hear from my stomach further music in accord with the mystic chanting of the spheres, of the stars that sang together in the dawn of creation, prophesizing food for me. I have a faith that Providence has hidden for me in yonder tall grass. Still more ornithological delicatessen. Oh, gaily let me strangle what is gaily given. Well, here, boss, this is something to be said for the lyric and imperial attitude. Believe that everything is for you until you discover you are for it. Sing your faith in what you get to eat right up to the minute you are eaten. For you are going to be eaten. Will the orchestra please strike up that old Tutankhamun jazz while I dance a few steps I learnt from an Egyptian scarab, and someday I will narrate you the most merry light-headed wheeze that the skull of Yorick put across an answer to the melancholy of the Dane, and also what the ghost of Hamlet's father replied to the skull, not forgetting the worm that wriggled across one of the picks the grave diggers had left behind. For the worm listened and winked at Horatio, while the skull and the ghost and the prince talked, saying there are more things twixt the vermiform appendix and nirvana than are dreamt of in thy philosophy, for Horatio. I'm going to leave off the last two lines because I haven't figured out how to read them yet, but I will encourage you to find them yourself. So, I believe that is all of my published poems so far. And I think I would read just one more poem by somebody else, and then we'll cap it and take whatever comments or questions. Okay, maybe two. I'm not sure which is the more serious. But I've given this song at readings after sharing that I read a news story about a Palestinian woman who married an Israeli man. And both of their families abandoned them, which is an incredibly hard thing, if you can only imagine it, to be bereft of all family on all sides. And this is Houseman, A.E. Houseman, writing about the territory of land over which there was warfare for more than 500 years. That land is called the Welsh Marshes, and the Anglo-Saxons and the Welsh repeatedly went back and forth and back and forth. And out of all that, this poem by A.E. Housman was written back, I think the late 1800s. I don't know if it was the 1880s or 1870s. I don't know which. The Welsh Marches. High the veins of Shrewsbury gleam, islanded in Severn stream. The bridges from the steepled crest cross the water east and west. The flag of morn in conqueror's state enters at the English gate. The vanquished eve as night prevails bleeds upon the road to Wales. Ages since the vanquished bled round my mother's marriage bed. There the ravens feasted far about the open house of war. When Severn down to Buildwas ran, colored with the death of man, couched upon her brother's grave, that Saxton got me on the slave. The sound of fight is silent wrong, that began the ancient wrong. Long the voice of tears is still, that wept of old the endless ill. In my heart it has not died, the war that sleeps on Severn's side. They cease not fighting east and west, on the marches of my breast. Here the truceless armies yet trample, rolled in blood and sweat. They kill and never die. And I think that each is I. None will part us, none undo the knot that makes one flesh of two. Sick with hatred and sick with pain, strangling, when shall we be slain? When shall I be dead and rid of the wrong my father did? How long till spade and hearse put to sleep my mother's curse? So, I'm sometimes asked why I still write formal poetry, and that's part of my answer, Besides the fact that it feels really good to the brain. So I'm looking for one more poem, and this is it. This is another A.E. Housman poem. And I don't agree with everything he has to say. And God knows his most morbid poems are so morbid, I think it's good that nobody remembers some of them. But as you'll hear in this poem, he accepts that his morbid poems are worthy of parody. And yet, if Stoicism has any value, he does his best to defend it. And so, without further ado, this is only referred to as 62, but it's also commonly known as Terence, This Is Stupid Stuff. And it starts with his friends assailing him. Terence, this is stupid stuff. You eat your victuals fast enough. There can't be much amiss, 'tis clear, to see the rate you drink your beer. But, oh, good Lord, the verse you make, it gives a chap a bellyache. The cow, the old cow, she is dead. It sleeps well, the horned head. We poor lads, 'tis our turn now. To hear such verses killed the cow. Pretty friendship 'tis to rhyme your friends to death before their time, moping, melancholy, mad. Come, pipe a tune to dance to, lad. Why, if it's dancing you'd be, there's brisker pipes than poetry. Or why was Burton built on Trent? And say, for what were hop yards meant? While many a peer of England brews livelier liquor than the muse, And malt does more than Milton can to justify God's ways to man. Ale, man, ale's the stuff to drink for fellows whom it hurts to think. Look into the pewter pot to see the world as though world's not, and faith 'tis pleasant till 'tis past. The mischief is, it 'twill not last. Oh, I have been to Ludlow Fair and left my necktie God knows where, and carried halfway home or near pints and quarts of Ludlow beer. Then the world seemed none so bad, and I myself a sterling lad, and down in lovely muck I've lain, happy till I woke again. Then I saw the morning sky. Hey-ho, the tale was all a lie. The world that was the old world yet, and I was I, and my things were wet, and nothing remained for me to do but to begin the game anew. Therefore, since the world has still much good, but much less good than ill, and while the sun and moon endure, luck's a chance, but trouble is sure, I'd face it as a wise man should, and train for ill and not for good. 'Tis true, the stuff I bring for sale is not so brisk a brew as ale. Out of the stem that scoured a hand, I wrung it in a weary land. But take it, and if the smack is sour, the better for the embittered hour. And it shall do good to heart and head when your soul is in my soul's stead. And I will friend you, if I may, in the dark and cloudy day. There was a king reigned in the east, and there where kings sit to feast, they get their fill before they think, with poisoned meat and poisoned drink. He gathered all that springs to birth from the many venomed earth, first a little, thence to more. He sampled all of her killing store, and easing, smile, seasoned, sound, sate the king when healths went round. They put arsenic in his meat, and stared aghast to watch him eat. They poured strychnine in his cup, and shook to see him drink it up. They shook, they stared as white your shirt, then it was their poison hurt. I tell the truth, I heard told, Mithridates, he died old. So, there you have it. There you have it. By reading all those poets, I think you see some of the influences upon my own stuff. Yeah, partially what happened to me was I stumbled upon my father's poetry collection when I was, there they were, and they all took. He had a good collection.